In a quiet American suburb, Claire Matthews was known as the woman who had it all together. The perfect mother, the supportive wife, the dependable friend. She was the one people called when they broke down, the one who remembered birthdays, who stayed up late to comfort others. But behind her gentle smile was a woman slowly unraveling. When her husband's emotional distance turns into betrayal, and her children grow too busy to notice her fading light, Claire's world quietly collapses. Everyone she loved moves forward, except her. One cold night, after driving aimlessly through empty streets, Claire stumbles upon a diner at the edge of town. There she meets Evelyn, an older waitress with a weathered face and eyes that have seen too much. Evelyn becomes the unlikely mirror that forces Claire to confront the truth, that loving everyone doesn't mean losing yourself. As Claire rebuilds from the ashes, learning to say no, rediscovering her passions and facing the painful memories she's buried. The story unfolds like a love letter to every woman who's ever given too much of herself to the world. But just when Claire begins to find herself again, an unexpected tragedy from her past resurfaces, a secret that challenges everything she thought she knew about love, forgiveness, and freedom. This is not just a story about loss. It's about awakening. A reminder that self-love isn't selfish. It's survival. In a world that rushes past its own heartbeat, there are still those who pause to feel. You're one of them. That's why you're here. Because some stories aren't meant to be watched. They're meant to be felt. Each word you'll hear tonight carries a pulse, a memory, a piece of someone who once dared to feel too much. Welcome back. This is where emotions breathe again, where silence tells the truth louder than words. So, close your eyes and let your soul remember what the world taught it to forget. And the morning began like every other, quietly, almost too quietly, in the Matthews house on the edge of Willow Creek, Illinois. A place where lawns were trimmed, neighbors waved with forced cheer, and the sound of sprinklers filled the air like white noise for lives that pretended to be perfect. The coffee pot gurgled in the kitchen. The calendar on the fridge was crowded with reminders written in 3 different colors: dentist appointments, PTA meetings, soccer practice, a fundraiser bake sale. Every square was filled except for one: Sunday, the only blank day. Claire had circled it months ago, promising herself she'd do something for her. She never did. Claire Matthews, 38, stood by the sink, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee mug as sunlight washed across the counter. She wore a faded sweatshirt, hair pinned up with a pencil, wedding ring dull from years of dish soap. From the outside, she looked like every other suburban mother. Composed, reliable, always in control. Inside, her thoughts drifted like smoke in an unventilated room. "Mom, I can't find my cleats." Her son, Jake, burst down the stairs, voice cracking with irritation. "They were right by the door last night," Claire called back automatically, even though she'd picked them up herself and set them neatly by the shoe rack. "They're not there now." Before she could reply, her daughter Lila appeared with her phone glued to her ear, rolling her eyes. "Mom, did you sign my field trip form? They said if it's not in today." "It's already in your backpack," Claire said without turning. She knew the rhythm of their needs by heart, the endless symphony of, "Where's my? Can you? Have you?" And then there was Mark. Her husband entered like a ghost wrapped in a suit, tie crooked, phone in hand. He kissed the air near her cheek, not quite touching her. "Morning," he murmured, eyes on a work email. "Morning," she replied softly. He didn't hear. The smell of toast filled the kitchen. The dog barked, someone spilled juice, the clock ticked louder than it should have. It was ordinary chaos, the kind that numbs you slowly, not with pain but with repetition. By 8:30, the house emptied. Silence replaced motion. Claire stood in the doorway, staring at the space where her family had just been. The floor was littered with crumbs, socks, half-folded papers, the kind of mess that never bothered anyone but her. She sighed, pressing her palms to the counter. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the stainless steel toaster. Tired eyes, soft lines, a smile that didn't reach them. Okay, she whispered to herself. Let's go. She grabbed her bag and keys, the same ones she'd carried for years, and stepped into her car. The morning air was crisp, autumn light slicing through the fog. She drove through streets lined with maple trees, their leaves turning orange and gold, a season of change she couldn't feel inside. At the high school where she worked as a counselor, Claire was known for her warmth, the kind of woman students trusted instantly, even when they said nothing. She listened without judgment. She remembered birthdays. She brought extra snacks in her drawer for kids who forgot lunch. She carried everyone's heartbreak like it was her own. Mrs. Matthews? A knock on her office door. It was Mia, a quiet girl with a hoodie pulled over her face. Claire smiled. Come in, sweetheart. Mia sat down, fidgeting with her sleeves. I can't handle everyone anymore. My mom, my friends, school. I feel like I'm drowning. Claire nodded, listening deeply, the way she always did. You don't have to carry everyone, she said softly. Sometimes, it's okay to rest. Mia blinked, eyes glossy. What about you? You look tired too. The words caught Claire off guard. She laughed gently, hiding the sting. Maybe I am, but I'm used to it. When Mia left, Claire sat in silence, staring at the empty chair. She realized no one had asked her how she was, not just today, but in years. That evening, the sky dimmed early, as if the world itself was weary. Mark called to say he'd be late. Another meeting, don't wait up. Jake was at practice. Lila locked in her room with music and teenage silence. Claire reheated leftovers she didn't taste, washed dishes she didn't dirty, folded clothes no one thanked her for. The television murmured in the background. Commercials for vacations, beauty creams, lives that looked effortless. She turned the volume down until it was nothing but the faint hum of static, a perfect reflection of her life. She wandered upstairs, past family portraits lining the hallway. In each one she was smiling, birthdays, graduations, holidays. But her eyes were always the same, tired, searching, somewhere else. She paused in front of one taken 10 years ago, when her hair was lighter, her smile real. Mark's arm around her then looked protective. Now it would feel heavy. She reached the bathroom, turned on the soft yellow light, and stared at herself in the mirror. Not the version that smiled for others, the real one. Her face looked older than she remembered, her skin pale under the harsh glow. She tried to recall the last time she'd done something just for herself. A movie she wanted to see. A day off with no agenda. Even a nap without guilt. Nothing came to mind. Her reflection blurred as tears welled. Not loud, theatrical tears, but the quiet kind that ache behind your eyes before they fall. She pressed her hands against the sink, whispering, "What happened to you?" The mirror didn't answer. Downstairs, the dryer beeped. Another load of laundry, another reminder of the cycle that never ends. She moved mechanically, folding shirts, pairing socks, stacking towels. Each item had a name, Jake's, Lila's, Mark's, none of them hers. Outside, rain began tapping against the windows. The sound was steady, almost soothing. Claire sank onto the couch, surrounded by folded clothes, and stared at the dark TV screen, her own faint reflection staring back. Her phone buzzed. A text from Mark. "Sorry, still at work. Don't wait up." Another from Lila. "Can you bring me a charger?" And from Jake. "We need more Gatorade for practice tomorrow." Not one said, "How are you, Mom?" or "I miss you." She set the phone down, exhaling slowly, feeling the air tremble in her chest. For a moment she imagined what would happen if she simply stopped. Stopped answering, stopped fixing, stopped being the woman everyone needed. Would they notice? Would anyone? The rain grew heavier. Lightning flickered through the blinds, casting brief shadows across her face. In that flash, she saw the version of herself she used to be. the one who laughed easily, who had dreams of opening her own art studio, who believed life could still surprise her. That woman felt like a ghost now, living somewhere deep inside her, waiting to be remembered. Claire stood and walked back to the mirror one last time before bed. Her reflection looked calmer now, though her eyes still shimmered with tears. She forced a smile, the practiced kind she wore for the world, and whispered, "You're fine." Then she turned off the light. But as the room fell into darkness, that smile trembled and broke. A single tear slipped down her cheek, unnoticed by anyone but her. Outside, thunder rolled softly, like a heartbeat in the sky. It was the sound of a woman breaking quietly, and no one hearing it. The next morning arrived with the hum of rain against the windows, soft and relentless. Claire woke before the alarm, as she always did. The house was quiet, except for the faint rhythm of the dishwasher still running from last night, another forgotten chore she'd set on delay. She sat up slowly, her body stiff from another restless sleep. Beside her, the bed was half empty, Mark's side already cold. She could hear him downstairs, the familiar shuffle of a coffee mug, the clatter of a spoon, the click of his laptop opening before sunrise. She used to love that sound, the sign of a hard-working husband. Now, it made her chest tighten. When she came down, he barely looked up from his screen. "Morning," she said softly. "Hey," he murmured, eyes still scanning an email. "We ran out of creamer." "Oh, I'll grab some after work." "No, thank you." "No, how'd you sleep?" Just the exchange of logistics between two people who used to be lovers. Claire poured herself black coffee and tried not to flinch at its bitterness. She'd once read that the human tongue adjusts to flavor over time. Maybe the heart does too, adjusting to neglect until it doesn't sting anymore. The silence stretched between them. The only sound was the faint buzz of his phone on the table, another message lighting up the screen. She didn't mean to look, but her eyes caught the name anyway. "Rachel, marketing." He smiled faintly as he typed back. Something in Claire's stomach twisted. Not jealousy. Not yet. Just awareness. A new kind of silence she couldn't explain, one that hummed beneath their every word. By the time she arrived at school, the rain had thinned to a mist. The parking lot shimmered under gray light, puddles reflecting the red brick building like fragments of a dream. Inside, the halls buzzed with chatter and slamming lockers. Claire smiled at students passing by, each one calling her name. "Morning, Mrs. Matthews." She returned every greeting, her warmth automatic, her armor flawless. But as she unlocked her office door, her phone vibrated. It was Mark again. "Can you pick up dry cleaning? Won't make it home till late." No heart emoji, no small talk. Just another logistical note in the business of their marriage. She stared at the message for a long moment, thumb hovering over the keyboard. Then she simply typed back, "Sure." One word, like the hundreds before it. Obedient, tidy, emotionless. Around noon, the knock on her door came. "Mia?" she said, smiling as the same quiet girl from last week peeked in. Mia nodded, sliding into the chair across from her. Her eyes were swollen, her hoodie damp at the cuffs. "What's going on?" Claire asked gently. The girl hesitated, then whispered, "Everyone needs something from me all the time. My mom, my friends. And when I can't give it, they get mad. I'm so tired, Mrs. Matthews." Claire's heart ached. She leaned forward, voice soft but steady. "You have to learn that it's not your job to keep everyone okay. You'll lose yourself that way." Mia wiped her eyes and looked up. "But you do it. You always look fine." The words struck like glass. Claire smiled faintly, pretending it didn't hurt. "Maybe I'm still learning too." Mia tilted her head. "You can't save everyone, Mrs. Matthews." That single line hung in the air long after the girl left, echoing in Claire's mind like a sermon she didn't want to hear. She stared at the empty chair again, the same one she'd sat facing last week, and thought about how easily she spoke compassion to others but never offered it to herself. By the time she drove home, night had fallen early. The rain had turned to sleet, tapping against her windshield like impatient fingers. Inside the house, the lights were on, but the warmth was gone. Mark sat on the couch, phone in hand, tie loosened, a half-empty beer beside him. She hesitated in the doorway. "Hey." He glanced up. "Hey, long day?" She nodded. "Yours?" "Same old. Got another big project starting." "That's good." He smiled vaguely, already looking back down at his screen. Their conversation had become a script, lines delivered without conviction, emotion removed for safety. "Dinner's in the oven," she said, voice small. He didn't respond, just nodded absently. Later that week, her friends from the neighborhood invited her for coffee. They met at a cozy cafe downtown, filled with soft jazz and the smell of cinnamon. 3 women, polished, laughing too loud, their problems neatly packaged as complaints about husbands who forgot to take out the trash. Claire smiled where she should, laughed on cue, stirred her latte to keep her hands busy. "You're so strong, Claire," said Melissa, the loudest of the group. "Always calm, always perfect. I don't know how you do it." Strong. The word used to make her proud. Now it felt like a curse, a compliment people used when they didn't plan to offer help. She smiled anyway. "I just keep going," she said. And they nodded, relieved, because that's what everyone wanted her to do. Keep going. Never stop. Never need. But that night, as she drove home alone under the hum of streetlights, her chest felt hollow. The radio played softly, an old love song from her wedding year. She turned it off halfway through. The following day was their anniversary. She remembered because her phone reminded her. Mark didn't. There was no card, no flowers, not even a text. At dinner, he talked about work, about Rachel from marketing and the client who was a nightmare. Claire nodded, pretending to listen, her heart quietly crumbling behind a practiced smile. When he reached for his beer, his wedding ring caught the light, dull, scratched, like hers. She wondered if he even noticed they both stopped wearing it weeks ago. After he went upstairs to take a call, she sat at the kitchen table, phone in hand, scrolling through years of photos. Their wedding, their honeymoon, the first house, birthdays, vacations. Moments once filled with meaning now felt like evidence of something that used to exist. Her finger hovered over the delete icon. One tap, then another. One by one, the images disappeared. Like closing doors in a hallway she no longer wanted to walk down. It wasn't rage. It wasn't even grief. It was quiet acceptance, the sound of someone letting go piece by piece. Later, as she prepared for bed, Mark lay beside her, already half asleep. His breathing was steady, unbothered. Claire stared at the ceiling, the soft hum of the fan blending with the ache in her chest. For the first time in years, she didn't pray for their marriage to feel whole again. She prayed for the strength to stop pretending it was. Outside, the wind pressed against the windows, whispering through the trees. In the darkness, Claire turned on her side, facing away from him, eyes open, thoughts loud. Her phone lay on the nightstand, screen black, gallery empty. All those moments gone. But she didn't regret it. Because for the first time the silence between them wasn't filled with denial. It was filled with truth, raw, painful, but honest. And honesty, even when it breaks you, is still a kind of freedom. The next morning, sunlight crept through the curtains, slicing across her face like a new beginning she wasn't ready for. Mark kissed her forehead mechanically before leaving. A habit, not affection. When the door shut, she exhaled the breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. In the stillness, she whispered to herself, "You can't save everyone." The words lingered in the air, no longer Mia's, now hers. And though her reflection in the mirror still looked tired, Something behind her eyes had changed. A small spark. Faint, but alive. The first crack in the picture. The kind that lets the light in. The air in the house had grown cold, not from the weather, but from the silence that filled every corner of it. Days passed quietly like muted film reels. Work, home, dinner, sleep, repeat. Claire moved through them like a ghost, haunting her own life. She had started noticing the small things. Mark's late nights that stretched into early mornings, the faint trace of perfume on his coat that wasn't hers, the way his phone never left his side, even in the shower. He used to forget it everywhere. Now he guarded it like a secret. It wasn't one moment that broke her. It was all of them combined, like cracks spidering through glass until it finally shatters. It happened on a Sunday afternoon, one of those quiet days where the world feels paused. Mark had left for a quick meeting, though it was their first free day together in weeks. Claire stayed behind, folding laundry, trying not to let her thoughts wander. But the ache in her chest wouldn't settle. When she passed his study, she noticed the laptop still open on the desk. A faint light glowed from the screen. She hesitated in the doorway. Her hands trembled. Curiosity? No, it wasn't curiosity. It was intuition. The kind that only comes from years of knowing someone deeply enough to feel the truth before seeing it. She stepped closer. The laptop's screensaver hadn't yet kicked in. A window was still open. An email thread. Her eyes scanned it, slowly at first, then faster, her pulse climbing. Rachel. Marketing. The same name she'd seen flash across his phone weeks ago. Her heart sank as she read the words. I can't stop thinking about last night. The way you looked at me across the table. It felt like no one else existed. Wish we could talk without pretending all the time. R. Her breath caught. She scrolled. I feel the same, Mark had written back. Sometimes it's easier to be around you than it is at home. Claire doesn't understand me anymore. That line, Claire doesn't understand me anymore, hit harder than any confession of love could have. She pressed a hand to her chest, as if that could keep her heart from breaking open. The world around her went silent. The hum of the heater, the ticking clock, even her own breathing. She stared at those words until they blurred. When she finally closed the laptop, her reflection stared back at her in the darkened screen. Pale, motionless, unreal. She didn't scream. She didn't throw anything. She just stood there trembling quietly, as if sound itself would make the betrayal too real to bear. That night Mark came home late again. He kissed her cheek, called her sweetheart, and asked if she'd eaten. She nodded, though she hadn't touched food all day. He talked about work, about tight deadlines, about Rachel, casually, easily, as though she were just another name in his orbit. Claire smiled where she should, nodding at all the right moments, hiding the earthquake beneath her calm. But when he went upstairs, she grabbed her keys. The clock read 10:42 p.m. The house was still, the air heavy. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to move, before the walls caved in. Outside, the rain had returned, streaking across the windshield as she drove into the night. Streetlights flashed past like brief memories, fragments of a life that suddenly felt foreign. The wipers squeaked rhythmically, the only steady thing left. She didn't blast the radio. She couldn't. She needed silence, the kind that lets the truth breathe. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tighter with every mile, tears clouding her vision. How long? She whispered to no one. How long has he been gone, even while sitting next to me? No answer came, only the endless road. After nearly an hour she saw it, a small neon sign glowing through the rain. Evelyn's Diner, open 24 hours. The kind of place that hadn't changed since the 70s. A haven for night shift truckers and people running from something they couldn't name. She pulled in, the gravel crunching beneath her tires, headlights cutting through the mist. When she stepped inside, the bell above the door chimed, soft but clear. The diner smelled like coffee, rain, and something fried. Warm light bounced off chrome stools and faded wallpaper. Old country music played faintly from a jukebox that had seen better days. Only one other person sat in a corner booth, an old man nursing a cup of coffee, eyes lost in thought. Behind the counter stood Evelyn, a woman in her early 60s with silver hair tied up in a bun, deep laugh lines etched into her face. Her name tag was scratched but legible. "Sit anywhere you like, honey," she said, her voice warm but worn. Claire chose a booth by the window where rain ran down in silver rivers. Evelyn approached with a coffee pot. "Late night?" Claire nodded. "Something like that?" "You look like you've been crying." The bluntness made Claire's throat tighten. "I had a rough day." Evelyn poured the coffee without asking. "Everyone who comes in after 10 has had a rough day. You'd be surprised how similar people are when it's this late." Claire tried to smile. "Guess I'm not that special then." "Oh, you'd be surprised," Evelyn said, sliding her the cup. "It's not about being special. It's about being seen. Big difference." For a moment they sat in silence. Rain tapped against the glass, steady as a heartbeat. Claire stirred her coffee, though she didn't drink it. The warmth in her hands was the only proof she still existed. Evelyn leaned on the counter, studying her. "You remind me of someone," she said finally. "Who?" "Me. About 25 years ago. A woman who gave so much she forgot she mattered." The words hit Claire like lightning. She blinked fast, her throat tightening. "What happened to her?" Evelyn smiled sadly. She woke up one day and realized no one was coming to save her. So she saved herself. Took me a while to learn that, though. Spent years pouring coffee for people who never asked my name. Claire's chest ached. "How do you do it? Keep going?" Evelyn shrugged. "You stop waiting for the world to notice you. You notice yourself. You start small. One meal you actually enjoy. One place you visit just for you. One person you forgive. And maybe eventually, it's you." Claire felt something inside her crumble. She lowered her head, pressing her palms to her eyes. For the first time in years, she didn't hold back. The tears came. Slow, deep, unrestrained. Evelyn didn't interrupt. She just placed a napkin on the table and sat across from her, silent witness to the kind of grief words can't fix. After a while, Evelyn said softly, "That man must have hurt you bad." Claire nodded, tears streaking her cheeks. "He did." "You still love him?" "I don't even know who he is anymore." Evelyn looked out the window, her reflection pale against the glass. "Then maybe it's time you start figuring out who you are again." The clock above the counter read 1:07 a.m. when Claire finally stood to leave. Her coffee sat untouched, now cold. She placed a few bills on the counter. Evelyn waved her off. "On the house. You look like you needed to sit more than you needed to drink." "Thank you," Claire whispered. Evelyn's eyes softened. "You come back any time, honey. There's always light in this place, even at the darkest hour." Outside, the rain had stopped. The sky was beginning to clear, streaks of moonlight breaking through. Claire stood beside her car for a long time, breathing in the damp air, the scent of earth and asphalt. For the first time in weeks, she felt the sharp ache of being alive. Painful, but real. She looked at her reflection in the car window. Her eyes were red, her hair disheveled, but there was something new there too. A glint of defiance. When she finally got behind the wheel, she didn't head home. She just drove, not to escape, but to remember what freedom felt like. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, dark and open, like the space between endings and beginnings. And somewhere in that darkness, as the wind rushed through the cracks of her window, Claire whispered the truth Evelyn had made her see. "I forgot I mattered." Her voice broke. But beneath the pain, there was a flicker, a fragile promise to herself, to remember again. The following morning, sunlight crept softly through the blinds, too gentle for how Claire felt inside. The house was still except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. She sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a cup of lukewarm coffee, staring at nothing. Last night felt like a dream. Evelyn's diner, the quiet compassion, the moment she'd finally cried. It all clung to her like a fragile scent she didn't want to lose. She looked at the calendar pinned to the fridge. School meetings, soccer practice, Mark's work events. Not one box had her name in it. Not one thing for her. Something inside her whispered, "That's going to change." By the end of the week, she found herself back at the diner. It had become a small sanctuary, a place untouched by her family's expectations or Mark's moods. Evelyn was wiping down the counter when Claire walked in. "Well, look who found her way back." Claire smiled faintly. "Guess I needed the coffee this time." "You need the company more," Evelyn said knowingly. They fell into a rhythm, quiet mornings over eggs and toast, sometimes talking, sometimes just sitting. Claire found comfort in the normalcy of it. Evelyn never pried, never offered pity. She simply listened. One morning after a long silence, Evelyn said, "You still thinking about him?" Claire hesitated. "Every day, but it's not just about him. It's everyone. I feel like I've been living for everyone else's peace of mind. The wife who never complains. The mom who always understands. The counselor who always has the right words. But when I'm alone, I feel empty. Like I forgot who I was before all the titles." Evelyn nodded slowly. "That's what happens when you make yourself a home for everyone but yourself. Sooner or later, you run out of room." Claire stared at her coffee, the surface rippling slightly from her trembling fingers. "I wouldn't even know where to start," she admitted. Evelyn smiled softly. "Start small. Learn to say no without apologizing. Learn to ask for help without guilt. And maybe," she tilted her head, "start writing. It helps you hear yourself again." That night, after the kids were asleep and Mark was working late again, Claire pulled out an old leather-bound notebook from the back of a drawer. It was a gift from years ago, unopened, untouched, forgotten. She sat at her desk, pen poised, staring at the blank page. The first words came hesitantly, like stepping into cold water. "I don't know who I am anymore. I've spent years making everyone else comfortable. Maybe that's why I'm so uncomfortable in my own skin." Her hand shook as she wrote, but she didn't stop. "Mark doesn't see me. Maybe he hasn't for a long time. The kids don't mean to take me for granted. They just don't know any different. Because I taught them that mom never breaks. But I'm breaking." By the time she stopped, tears had smudged the ink. But for the first time, she felt lighter. It wasn't peace, not yet, but it was something close to truth. She closed the notebook gently, like tucking away a secret piece of herself. Change, however small, never goes unnoticed in a house built on routine. The first crack appeared at dinner. Claire had spent the afternoon doing laundry, cleaning, and counseling 3 students at school. When Mark came home, she was still folding towels. "Hey," she said lightly. "Could you set the table tonight? I'm exhausted." Mark looked at her as if she'd spoken another language. "You're exhausted?" "Yes, Mark. I've been running all day. It would just help if—" "Claire, I've had a long day too," he cut in. "You know I'm swamped right now." Something about his tone, the dismissive edge, made her chest tighten. But instead of apologizing, she quietly continued folding. A few nights later, she asked her daughter, Lila, to handle her own laundry. Lila frowned. "Why? You always do it." "Because you're 16, Claire said gently, "and I'm trying to teach you responsibility." Her daughter sighed dramatically. "God, Mom, you're acting so weird lately." "Maybe I'm just tired of pretending I'm fine all the time." Her words hung in the air. Lila looked confused, not angry, just unsettled, as if her mother had broken some unspoken rule. Then her son Jake chimed in from across the table. "Why are you acting different?" Claire blinked, caught off guard. "I'm not acting different. I'm just asking for help." "Yeah, but it's like you're mad at everyone," he said, frowning. "Did Dad do something?" Her heart clenched. "No," she said quickly. "It's not about that." But they didn't look convinced. Her own children, the people she'd sacrificed everything for, were looking at her like she'd changed the script they'd learned to follow. Later that night, Mark confronted her in their bedroom. "I don't know what's going on with you lately," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "You've been distant, cold even." Claire looked up from her book. "I'm just trying to take care of myself a little," he scoffed. "By snapping at the kids? By making everyone walk on eggshells?" "I'm not snapping. I'm asking for help. Claire, you've been off for weeks. I think you're imagining things." The words struck her like a slap. "Imagining things?" she repeated softly. He shrugged, voice steady, patronizing. "You've been stressed. Maybe it's the hormones. You're just seeing problems that aren't there." She stared at him, stunned. The man who'd betrayed her, who'd left her drowning in silence, was now rewriting her reality to make her question her own pain. Her voice trembled, but she refused to break. "Don't do that, Mark." "Do what?" "Make me feel crazy for asking for what I deserve." He shook his head, dismissive. "You're overreacting, Claire. You always do when you're emotional." Then he turned off the light and climbed into bed, as if the conversation were over. She sat there in the dark, heart pounding. For years she'd been the peacemaker, the one who swallowed her feelings to keep the household calm. But now, she saw it clearly. Peace built on silence isn't peace. It's control. She slipped out of bed and went downstairs. The kitchen was quiet, bathed in the soft glow of the refrigerator light. She stood before the mirror that hung above the sink, the same one she'd stared into weeks ago, the night everything began to unravel. Her reflection looked different now, still tired, still fragile, but there was something new in her eyes, a spark, a refusal. "I'm not crazy," she whispered to the glass. The woman staring back almost smiled, not in arrogance but in recognition. She was starting to see herself again. In the weeks that followed, her notebook filled quickly. Every night after everyone went to sleep, she wrote, not about the pain, but about the small rebellions. "I said no today and the world didn't end. I went to the diner and didn't check my phone once. I listened to myself instead of apologizing for my feelings." She began journaling not as therapy, but as proof. Proof that she existed outside of her roles. Evelyn noticed the change, too. "You're standing taller," she said one morning, refilling Claire's cup. "I don't feel taller," Claire replied with a small smile. "You don't have to feel it yet. You just have to keep showing up for yourself." Claire nodded and for once believed it. But storms don't pass easily. Mark began growing more irritable, snapping at small things, accusing her of neglecting the family. When she stopped answering his texts right away, he accused her of being secretive. When she spent time at the diner, he mocked her. "What, your therapist friend teaching you how to rebel now?" She didn't argue. She just wrote it down. Every word, every manipulation, every flicker of truth. Her journal became her lifeline, her witness, her mirror, her storm shelter. In those pages, she wasn't Mrs. Matthews. She wasn't the perfect wife or counselor or mother. She was just Claire, raw, wounded, awakening. One night she drove to the diner after closing. The neon sign was dark, the chairs turned upside down on the tables. But she sat in her car anyway, parked beneath the flickering streetlight. Rain began to fall again. Soft at first, then heavier, until it blurred the world outside her windshield. And for the first time, she didn't feel afraid of the storm. She watched it, let it surround her. Because this time she knew. Storms don't always come to destroy. Sometimes they come to clear. Claire closed her eyes, resting her head against the seat. Somewhere deep inside her, a quiet truth began to rise. She was done being everyone's anchor. It was time to be her own. The breaking point came quietly. No shouting, no thrown objects, just exhaustion disguised as calm. It was late, and the air in the house felt heavy, stale, like a room that hadn't been aired out in years. Mark was pacing the living room, voice rising with each word. "You're being ridiculous, Claire. You don't just walk out on your family because you're unhappy." Claire stood by the window, arms folded, rain smearing against the glass behind her. Her reflection stared back. Pale, tired, unrecognizable. "I'm not walking out," she said softly. "I'm letting go before I disappear completely." He scoffed. "Disappear? You think leaving makes you whole? You're being selfish." That word, selfish, cut deep. It was the one she'd feared her whole life. The one that kept her quiet, obedient, useful. But something had shifted inside her. Something Evelyn's words had started to awaken. She turned to face him, eyes wet but steady. "For years I've given you everything I had. Time, energy, patience. And every time I tried to ask for something back, you called it complaining. I'm not selfish, Mark, I'm empty." He shook his head, frustrated, unable to meet her gaze. "You're overreacting. You'll regret this." She didn't answer. Because maybe she would. Maybe regret was the price of freedom. But staying was death by 1,000 small silences. When the argument ended, there was nothing left to say. He went upstairs. She stood in the quiet. And that's when she knew. This was it. She moved through the house like a ghost, gathering fragments of her life into a single small bag. A few clothes, her journal, her wallet, the photo of Lila and Jake when they were still little, both laughing so hard one of them was mid-blink. She held that photo against her chest, whispering, "I love you. I'm not leaving you. I'm finding me, so I can come back whole." It didn't make it easier, but it made it honest. When she stepped outside, the world was washed in soft rain. The driveway glistened, the streetlights hazy and distant. She placed the bag in the passenger seat and sat behind the wheel, gripping it until her knuckles turned white. The house behind her looked the same. Warm, familiar, a picture of domestic calm. But it wasn't home anymore. It was a memory, dressed as safety. She started the car and pulled away slowly, the tires whispering against wet asphalt. No music, no destination, just the sound of her own breath. Shaky, uneven, alive. She drove for hours without direction, past sleeping neighborhoods, gas stations, empty fields. Each mile felt like peeling back a layer of her old self. The guilt pressed down on her chest, heavy and relentless. What kind of mother leaves her children? What kind of wife doesn't fight harder? But underneath that voice was another, quieter one. What kind of woman keeps dying slowly just to be loved? By dawn, she found herself near the lake. Gray water stretching endlessly, the horizon soft and blurred. A small vacancy sign blinked outside a roadside inn. She pulled over, numb. Inside, the air smelled faintly of pine cleaner and old carpet. A tired woman behind the counter looked up. "Need a room?" "Yes," Claire said, her voice cracking. "Just for a while." The woman handed her a key with a sympathetic nod. "You look like someone who needs to sleep for a week." Claire smiled weakly. "Maybe longer." The room was small. One bed, one lamp, a window overlooking the water. She placed her bag on the chair, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at the blank wall. For a long time she didn't move. Then the tears came, quiet at first, then unstoppable. It wasn't a single cry. It was every cry she'd buried for years. All the swallowed words, all the nights she smiled through breaking. When she finally caught her breath, she reached for her phone and dialed Evelyn. Claire? Evelyn's voice came through, warm and alert even at that hour. Honey, it's early. You all right? There was a pause. Then the dam broke. I left, Evelyn. I left the house. I didn't plan it. I just couldn't stay anymore. Evelyn didn't sound surprised. Where are you? By the lake. I got a room. I don't know what I'm doing. There was a soft exhale on the other end. You're doing something brave. I feel guilty, Claire said, tears slipping down her face. I keep seeing their faces. Mark, Lila, Jake. I feel like I've betrayed them. No, sweetheart, Evelyn said gently. Sometimes walking away is how you come home to yourself. The words hit like rain on dry ground. Claire closed her eyes, letting the silence between them stretch. Evelyn's voice softened even more. You've spent your whole life teaching people how to love you. By shrinking. By saying yes. By bleeding quietly. Maybe now it's time you show them something different. That love doesn't mean losing yourself. Claire didn't respond. She couldn't. The words filled every part of her that had been empty for too long. When they hung up, she sat in the stillness, listening to the hum of the heater and the soft whisper of lake wind through the window. For the first time, she didn't feel like she was running from something. She was walking toward something, even if she didn't know what it was yet. Days turned into weeks. Claire found herself returning to the diner, drawn by its quiet warmth and the familiar comfort of Evelyn's voice. The regulars started recognizing her. A kind old man who tipped too much, a single mom who worked double shifts, a group of fishermen who told bad jokes. They didn't know her story. They didn't need to. They just saw her. The way she carried herself, the quiet sadness beneath her polite smile. When Evelyn offered her a part-time job, she hesitated. I've never waited tables before. Evelyn shrugged. Doesn't matter. You've spent years serving everyone else. This time you'll get paid for it. It was meant as a joke, but it landed like grace. So she started working mornings, wiping counters, refilling coffee cups, learning the rhythm of a life without pretense. The work was simple, almost meditative. Each act of service felt different now, not obligation but choice. Here she wasn't Mrs. Matthews. She wasn't the dependable counselor or the invisible wife. She was just Claire. Customers smiled when she refilled their mugs. Evelyn teased her about her too polite tone. And sometimes between the laughter and clinking dishes, Claire caught herself breathing freely. Not the shallow, cautious breaths of survival, but the full ones of someone learning to live again. But the guilt never fully left. Some nights she'd sit by the window of her small room, staring at the lake reflecting the moon. Her journal lay open beside her, pages filled with questions that had no easy answers. Did I abandon them? Or did I finally stop abandoning myself? She'd picture Lila, her quick wit and sensitive heart. Jake, quiet and stubborn like his father, but with her eyes. Did they miss her? Did they understand? Or were they angry? Listening to Mark's version of the story where she was the villain who walked away. The ache of not knowing pressed against her ribs. Sometimes she'd pick up her phone, scroll through old family photos, hover over their numbers. But she couldn't bring herself to call. Not yet. She needed to become someone worth coming home to. Weeks passed, and life began to take shape again. She found small joys. The smell of coffee in the morning. The way lake mist rolled over the water at sunrise. The sound of Evelyn humming old songs while flipping pancakes. Each day felt fragile, but real. For the first time in decades, she belonged to herself. One evening after closing, Evelyn sat across from her at the counter. You look different, she said, studying her. Older? Claire teased softly. No, Evelyn said with a smile. Lighter. Claire looked down, tracing the rim of her mug with her finger. Some days I still feel like I'm drowning in guilt. Evelyn nodded. You will. That's what healing feels like at first. drowning in the same water you're learning to swim through. Claire met her eyes. Do you think they'll ever forgive me? Evelyn reached across the counter, her hand warm and steady. Maybe. Maybe not. But one day you'll forgive you. That's what matters. The diner was empty except for the hum of the refrigerator and the soft flicker of the neon sign outside. Claire smiled faintly, tears welling again. Not from pain this time, but gratitude. Because for the first time in her life, someone wasn't asking her to be anything other than herself. And in that quiet moment, sitting beneath the soft light of the diner, Claire finally understood what Evelyn had meant. Walking away hadn't been about leaving them. It had been about finding her. Therapy wasn't something Claire ever imagined herself doing. For years she had been the one everyone leaned on, the listener, the fixer, the calm presence that steadied the storm. Sitting across from a stranger, being asked how she felt foreign, almost selfish. But on her first day, something in her chest cracked open the moment she sat down. The therapist's office was soft and neutral, with light spilling across beige walls and a single plant in the corner that somehow looked more alive than she felt. Take your time, Dr. Walsh said gently, her voice steady. You don't have to have the right words. Claire nodded, eyes fixed on the floor. I'm not sure where to start. Dr. Walsh tilted her head. Then start with where it hurts most. For a moment Claire couldn't breathe. Then it came out. Not as a neat confession, but as a rush, messy and trembling. She spoke of Mark, of the exhaustion that lived in her bones, of the silence that had grown louder than any argument. But as she spoke, something deeper stirred beneath it all. The faint echo of a younger pain. Dr. Walsh noticed. It sounds like you've been trying to earn love for a long time. That line stopped Claire cold. Her throat tightened. What do you mean? Dr. Walsh leaned forward slightly. You give. You fix. You care for everyone. But who taught you that love only comes when you're useful? The words landed like a whisper from another lifetime. And suddenly Claire wasn't sitting in that quiet office anymore. She was 10 years old again, standing in her childhood kitchen while her mother criticized the way she folded the laundry. You never do things right, her mother had said sharply. If you want people to like you, Claire, you have to try harder. She remembered nodding, small and quiet, swallowing tears before they reached her throat. She remembered the way she'd chased her mother's approval, cleaning, performing, perfecting, just to be told she wasn't enough. That ache had followed her into every relationship, every act of kindness that came from fear, not freedom. She had learned early that love was conditional, that to be cared for she had to earn it. And now, sitting in that chair decades later, she realized she had built her entire adult life on that same unspoken rule. The next few sessions were brutal. Therapy peeled back the layers she'd kept buried under busyness and smiles. Some nights she left the office trembling, the air outside feeling too raw, too loud. She'd walk along the lake shore afterward, letting the sound of water steady her breathing. Sometimes she'd whisper to the wind, "It wasn't my fault." But the words didn't always stick. Healing, she was learning, wasn't a straight line. It was more like a tide, sometimes pulling her under, sometimes carrying her gently forward. Evelyn noticed the change. You've been quiet lately, she said one morning at the diner as Claire refilled the sugar jars. Claire smiled faintly. Just thinking a lot. Evelyn nodded. Good, that means you're feeling. It was strange how her new life, so small and stripped down, felt fuller than the old one ever had. There were moments of light now, a regular's laugh, a sunrise over the lake, the feel of her own name spoken without exhaustion. But even as she healed, the ghosts of her past hovered, not just from her childhood, but from the family she'd left behind. It started with a message. One afternoon, after her shift, she checked her phone and saw Lila's name on the screen. "Hey, Mom, can we talk?" Her heart leapt and broke all at once. She stared at the message for a long time, her thumb hovering over the keyboard before she finally typed back, "Always, when you're ready." They met a few days later at a small cafe halfway between the lake and their old neighborhood. When Claire walked in, she spotted Lila instantly, her hair pulled into a messy bun, her father's frown on her face, her mother's eyes searching for something. "Hi, sweetheart," Claire said, voice barely above a whisper. Lila didn't smile right away. She looked nervous, guarded, but then she sighed, like she'd been holding her breath for months. "I didn't know if you'd come." "I'll always come," Claire said softly. They sat in silence for a while, the clinking of cups and low hum of conversation filling the space. Then, finally, Lila spoke. "Dad said you left because you couldn't handle us anymore." Claire's heart clenched. "That's not true." "I figured," Lila said quickly, eyes dropping to her cup. "He's angry all the time now. I think he misses you, but he doesn't know how to say it." Claire nodded slowly. "I miss you. All of you. Every day." Lila's eyes glistened. "Then why didn't you come home?" The question sliced through her, clean and cruel. But Claire didn't look away. "Because I had to learn who I was before I could be a mother again. I was disappearing, Lila. I didn't want you to grow up thinking that was love, giving so much of yourself that nothing's left." Tears filled Lila's eyes. I don't know how to be around Dad. He blames you for everything, but he's not happy either." Claire reached across the table, hesitated, then placed her hand gently over her daughter's. "You don't have to choose sides, sweetheart. You just have to choose yourself." That broke something open between them. Not a full reconciliation, but the fragile start of one. They talked until dusk, about school, friends, small things that once would have been lost in the noise of a house too full of resentment. When they finally said goodbye, Lila hugged her for the first time in months, quick but real, her breath catching against Claire's shoulder. And for a moment, Claire felt hope again. Soft, uncertain, but alive. Then came the phone call. It was a Wednesday evening. Claire had just finished journaling, her pen hovering over a sentence she couldn't quite complete when her phone rang. The number was familiar, but not Lila's. "Hello? Mrs. Matthews?" a man's voice said. "This is Officer Henderson from Brookfield Police. There's been an accident." Her body went cold. "What? Who?" "Your husband, Mark. He's stable, but he was in a car crash earlier tonight. They've taken him to St. Mary's Hospital." The room began to spin. She pressed a hand to her chest, trying to steady her breath. Did he? "He's alive," the officer assured. "Conscious, but shaken up. He asked that we call you." After hanging up, she just sat there staring at the wall, her mind a tangle of shock and instinct. For years, her reflex had always been the same. Go, fix, help. The part of her that had always rushed toward pain stirred instantly. But another voice, quieter, wiser, rose beneath it. "Don't lose yourself again, Claire." She stood at the window, watching the wind ripple across the lake. Her reflection in the glass didn't look panicked or desperate anymore. It looked steady. She knew she would go, not out of guilt, not to rescue, but because compassion still lived in her. But she also knew this time would be different. This time, she wouldn't disappear. The hospital smelled faintly of antiseptic and coffee. That strange blend of hope and fatigue that lived in every corridor. Claire walked through the automatic doors slowly, her heart thudding in quiet rhythm with each step. She had promised herself she wouldn't come back too soon, but something inside her had shifted since the call. Not the old reflex to fix, but a new kind of strength, the kind that came from forgiveness, not dependence. It wasn't pity that brought her back. It was peace, or at least the desire for it. Mark was sitting up when she entered the room, his arm in a sling, face pale beneath the bruises. He looked smaller somehow, not physically, but in spirit. like life had finally humbled him in ways words never could. When he saw her, his expression flickered with disbelief, then relief. "You came." She nodded. "I said I would check in." There was no bitterness in her voice, no tremor, just calm, a calm that felt earned. He gestured weakly toward the chair beside his bed. "Please, sit." Claire hesitated for a second before taking the seat. The air between them felt heavy but not suffocating. For once, there were no accusations waiting, no defenses rising, just two people staring at the wreckage of what they'd built and what they'd broken. Mark cleared his throat. "I've been thinking a lot about everything." She looked at him, waiting. He exhaled, slow and shaky. "About the messages you found. About the way I treated you. I can't keep pretending it was nothing." Claire's pulse quickened, but she stayed silent. He continued. "It wasn't physical, not in the way you probably think, but it was emotional. And that's worse, isn't it?" Her chest tightened. "It's not about worse. It's about why." Mark nodded, eyes glistening. "Because I was lonely. I felt like you didn't see me anymore." That old argument, the one that used to unravel every conversation, hung in the air. But this time, Claire didn't flinch. She simply breathed. "I did see you, Mark," she said softly. "I just stopped seeing myself." He closed his eyes, tears threatening. I know that now. And I hate what I did to you. You didn't deserve it." For a moment, neither spoke. The heart monitor beeped steadily, a quiet rhythm to their silence. Then Claire said, "You didn't just hurt me, Mark. You made me believe that my worth depended on holding everything together. That if I just tried harder, loved harder, you'd see me. And I carried that lie until it broke me." He swallowed hard. "I didn't mean to break your spirit." "I know," she said gently. "But you did." The words weren't cruel. They were truth, unshakable, unweaponized. Mark leaned forward slightly, pain flickering across his face. "So where does that leave us?" Claire looked down at her hands, folded neatly in her lap. "It leaves us free. Both of us." He blinked. "Free?" "Yes." She lifted her gaze, steady and sad. "I forgive you, Mark." His breath hitched. "You forgive me?" "I do," she said simply. "Not because you asked for it, but because I need peace. Carrying what you did, what we did, has been eating me alive. I can't heal if I keep bleeding for both of us." Tears slipped down his cheeks. "You always were the stronger one." Claire shook her head. "No. I just finally got tired of drowning." They sat in silence again. Not the angry silence of their old marriage, but a stillness that felt strangely holy. A closing of something that had once been everything. She stood to leave, but paused at the door. "Take care of yourself, Mark, really. And maybe one day learn to love someone without needing them to disappear first." He nodded, voice breaking. "I'm sorry, Claire." "I know," she said. "But sorry isn't what I need anymore." And with that, she turned and walked out, her footsteps echoing softly down the sterile hallway. Outside, the late afternoon light spilled through the glass doors, painting everything gold. Claire stopped for a moment, the sun warming her face. For the first time, forgiveness didn't feel like surrender. It felt like flight. That night at the diner, the air buzzed with chatter and clinking silverware. Claire wiped down the counter absent-mindedly, her thoughts miles away. Evelyn watched her from the coffee machine, eyes narrowing with quiet intuition. "You did it, didn't you?" she said finally. Claire looked up. "Did what?" "Close the door that's been creaking in your chest." A soft smile tugged at Claire's lips. "Yeah, I guess I did." Evelyn poured 2 mugs of coffee and slid one toward her. "And how does it feel?" Claire stared at the steaming cup. "Strange. Like I should be sadder." Evelyn grinned faintly. Forgiveness doesn't always feel like fireworks, sweetheart. Sometimes it just feels like breathing again. Claire nodded slowly, the words sinking deep. I thought forgiving him would mean letting him off the hook, she said quietly. But it's not that. It's just not letting him own me anymore. That's the truth, Evelyn said, her tone turning solemn. Forgiveness doesn't mean going back. It means you stop bleeding for someone else's wounds. The diner was quiet for a moment. Just the hum of the old jukebox and the soft laughter from a nearby booth. Claire let those words settle in her chest, heavy and healing all at once. Outside, the night pressed gently against the windows, and the reflection staring back at her wasn't the ghost of the woman she used to be. It was someone new. Someone lighter, steadier, still learning but no longer lost. She thought about her children, about the home she'd left, about the version of herself who once believed love meant sacrifice. And for the first time she didn't feel guilt, only gratitude. Gratitude for the pain that woke her, gratitude for the leaving that saved her, gratitude for the strength that forgiveness gave her, the kind that didn't need to be seen to be real. When the diner closed and the last customer left, Claire stepped outside into the cool air. The lake shimmered faintly in the distance, calm and endless. She closed her eyes and let the wind brush across her skin, not as comfort, but as confirmation. She was still here, still healing, still hers. And that was enough. She turned toward the quiet street, walking home beneath the streetlights. A woman who had once forgotten herself, now finding her way back one steady step at a time. The morning light poured softly through the lace curtains of Claire's new cottage, spilling gold across the wooden floors and stacks of half-finished canvases. The place still smelled faintly of paint and ocean air, a blend of creation and freedom. It wasn't big, just 2 rooms, a kitchen that creaked when the kettle boiled, and a small porch overlooking the water. But it was hers, built from the fragments of everything she'd survived. Each morning began with quiet rituals, coffee, journaling, a walk along the lake. She had learned to slow down, to move through her days like someone learning to breathe again. There were moments of loneliness, yes, but they were no longer unbearable. They felt honest. The kind of loneliness that told the truth, that came not from emptiness, but from space finally cleared for something real. When she began volunteering at the women's shelter, it was supposed to be temporary. Just a way to give back, to use her counseling background again. But the first time she sat across from a trembling young woman who whispered, "He said I'd be nothing without him." Something in Claire's chest caught fire. She listened. She held hands. She offered words she had once needed herself. And somewhere between those tearful confessions and small, brave smiles, she realized, helping others wasn't draining her anymore. It was healing her. The shelter became her second home, a haven for women trying to find their way out of invisible cages. Claire didn't come as a savior, but as a mirror. One afternoon, a woman named Jenna hugged her tightly after group therapy and whispered, "You make me believe I can start over." Claire smiled through tears. "You can. You already have." That night she walked home under the glow of streetlights, the wind soft against her skin. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was giving herself away. She was sharing herself, and that made all the difference. The more she gave herself permission to live, the more life found her. She began painting again, first timidly, with watercolors and cheap brushes from the dollar store, then boldly, with oils and broad strokes that covered her hands and arms. Her cottage soon filled with color, faces of women half lost, half awakening, lakeside sunsets bleeding into blues and golds, and abstract shapes that felt like emotion turned into light. Her small living room became a gallery of rediscovery. Each piece told a story she no longer needed to hide from. Evelyn stopped by one evening with her usual blunt warmth. "You've turned this place into a heart with walls," she said, running a finger along one of the paintings. Claire laughed. That's one way to put it. Evelyn smirked. You're not just surviving anymore, kid. You're living. That's rarer than people think. Letters began to arrive not long after. At first, just a few. Women from the shelter writing to thank her, or strangers who had read an article about her volunteer work in the local paper. But soon there were dozens, then hundreds. Some came from nearby towns, some from across the country. Each letter carried a story. A woman leaving a loveless marriage, another going back to school at 40, another learning to live without apology. They thanked her for her honesty, for her strength, for giving them hope. But Claire didn't see herself as a symbol. She saw herself as proof that broken things could still bloom. One letter read, "Your story made me believe that walking away isn't failure. It's faith." She taped that one above her desk. Every time doubt crept in, and it still did, she'd read it again. Life became simple, sacred, and quiet. Days filled with painting, volunteering, writing letters, tending to the wildflowers outside her porch. Nights filled with music, candlelight, and the occasional phone call from Lila and Jake. Her relationship with her kids was healing too, slow, imperfect, but genuine. Lila visited on weekends sometimes, helping her garden, or just sitting on the porch, feet dangling off the edge, both of them wrapped in an easy silence. "You seem happier here," Lila said one afternoon, watching the water ripple in the distance. Claire smiled softly. "I am. Happiness used to feel like something I had to chase. Now it just feels like something I make." Lila nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I think I'm starting to get it." That sentence, simple as it was, felt like redemption. Then came the letter. It arrived on a Thursday evening, tucked among the usual stack of mail. Bills, a thank you note from the shelter, a postcard from Evelyn on vacation, and one envelope that didn't belong. It was worn, edges yellowed with time, the postmark dated June 2015, 10 years ago. The handwriting was unfamiliar but oddly careful, deliberate, the kind of script from someone who had written many drafts before finding the courage to send it. She frowned, turning it over. The return address was smudged, but one word stood out clearly. Denver. Her stomach tightened. Denver, where her father had lived before disappearing when she was 17. Her first instinct was disbelief. Her father had been gone for decades, a ghost she had long stopped chasing. Her mother had told her he'd died in an accident. She had mourned him quietly, resenting him for leaving, yet yearning for his approval, even after death. But here it was. His handwriting. His name. Robert Matthews. She stood, shocked. Outside, the lake shimmered in the last light of dusk, the horizon bleeding gold into gray. The past she thought she'd buried had found its way back, carried by a letter that refused to be forgotten. The wind rattled the window softly, almost like a whisper. The story she thought was over had just begun again. The letter stayed on her kitchen table for days, edges curling slightly from the damp air, the ink softening where her tears had fallen. Claire couldn't bring herself to tuck it away or throw it out. It just sat there, haunting her, as though it carried a pulse of its own. Every morning she'd pour her coffee and catch her eyes drifting back to it, that uneven handwriting whispering pieces of a story she'd never been told. She wanted to believe she'd made peace with her past, that the ghosts had finally quieted. But this letter cracked something wide open. Her father hadn't died. He hadn't even left for the reasons she thought. He'd been taken, wrongfully imprisoned, for a crime he didn't commit. The words echoed in her mind long after she read them, like a scream muffled under years of silence. How much of her life had been shaped by a lie? Her mother's bitterness, her own fear of abandonment, the endless cycle of giving too much, loving too deeply, and asking for nothing in return. Now all of it shimmered under a new, painful light. Her father's final message repeated like a mantra in her chest. Don't let the world tell you who you are. It was simple, yet devastating, because for most of her life that's exactly what she had done. By the fourth day, she couldn't stand the waiting anymore. She packed a small overnight bag, jeans, a sweater, her journal, and drove toward Denver. The air grew colder the farther she went, the mountains stretching against the sky like silent witnesses. Her mind was a storm. Anger, grief, confusion, curiosity. She wanted to hate her mother for the lie, but a part of her understood. Pain can make people cruel in ways they don't even recognize. When she reached the town her father had once called home, it was smaller than she remembered. Time had weathered it. The main street looked frozen in a decade long gone. She stopped by an old diner, the kind with vinyl booths and chipped coffee mugs, and asked about him. The waitress, an older woman with soft eyes and a name tag that read Doris, hesitated when she heard his name. Robert Matthews. Lord, it's been years. He used to come in here every morning before. Her voice trailed off. Before what? Claire asked gently. Before they took him. Everyone knew he wasn't guilty, but once the sheriff's mind was made up, that was that. Small towns don't forgive easily, honey. Even when they're wrong. Claire's heart sank. What happened to him after prison? Doris sighed. He got out eventually, but he wasn't the same. Used to sit out by the lake on Birch Road most evenings just staring at the water. I think he hoped you'd come. She found the lake an hour later. It was quiet, lined with pines and the faint smell of rain. The bench still stood near the water's edge, weathered but steady. A place that had once held her father's waiting, his regret, his love. Claire sat there, running her hands along the worn wood, imagining him in that same spot, older and alone. Her tears came not with fury but with grief for all that had been lost. Years of misunderstanding, love stolen by silence, a father's name buried under someone else's sin. She whispered into the still air, "I'm here, Dad. I finally found you." The wind stirred the leaves in reply, gentle and almost knowing. Over the next few days, she pieced together fragments of his story. Newspaper clippings from the local archive, court transcripts yellowed with time, quiet testimonies from people who still remembered. Her father had been a mechanic, a kind man, known for helping anyone who asked. One night, a break-in at a nearby store turned violent, leaving a man injured. Her father had been the last one seen near the scene, his fingerprints on a wrench he'd loaned earlier that week. No witnesses, no defense, just a quick conviction. It took 10 years before new evidence cleared his name, but by then, he'd already lost everything. His marriage, his daughter, his sense of self. He'd tried to reach out. The letter had been one of many he'd written and never sent. Most had burned with him when he passed a few years later. Only this one had survived, misplaced in some forgotten post office drawer until fate decided otherwise. Claire spent hours sitting with that truth, staring at the courthouse steps where he'd once been sentenced, imagining his face as the gavel fell. For the first time she saw how deeply the cycle of silence ran. Her mother, raised to never question the men around her. Her father, punished for speaking the truth. Herself, conditioned to carry everyone else's pain but her own. Every generation had built walls around its wounds, mistaking quiet for strength. She realized then that the legacy she inherited wasn't just pain. It was suppression. The learned habit of disappearing to make others comfortable, and she was done with it. That night Claire drove back to her cottage by the lake. The air felt heavier, but also cleaner, like the world had shifted and exhaled. She stood outside for a long time watching the moon shimmer on the water. Then she pulled out her journal and began to write. Not about the pain, but about the truth. She wrote for her father, for her mother, for every woman who had swallowed her voice until it nearly choked her. She wrote for her daughter so that Lila would grow up knowing that love should never cost her her identity. She wrote for herself, because it was time to live without apology. A week later, she returned to the women's shelter with a different kind of energy, grounded, fierce, alive. When one of the women asked how she kept going after everything, Claire smiled softly and said, "By remembering that strength isn't built from what you survive. It's built from what you stop carrying." The room fell silent. Some of the women nodded, tears in their eyes. Others simply reached for her hand. She looked around at them, survivors, dreamers, fighters, and she knew she wasn't alone in this mission. Later that evening, as she packed up her things, she found herself humming, a melody her father used to play on his old guitar. She hadn't remembered it in years, but somehow it returned, tender and sure. It was then she realized that healing wasn't about erasing the past. It was about reclaiming it, giving it new meaning, letting it teach instead of torment. Standing by the lake outside her cottage, she whispered into the night, "I'll end this, Dad. The silence stops with me." The stars shimmered above her, reflected in the water like scattered hope. For the first time, Claire felt her heart settle, not in peace that denied the past, but in peace that understood it. She no longer belonged to the broken story written for her. She was writing her own now, and this one would end with freedom. The morning of the exhibition began with stillness, the kind that lives right before a beginning. The lake outside her window shimmered pale gold, rippled by a quiet breeze. Claire stood by the window of her small cottage, coffee warming her hands, and watched as sunlight touched the water like a benediction. She had dreamed of this day, though she never dared to believe it would come. The gallery downtown was modest, white walls, hardwood floors, the faint scent of fresh paint. But to Claire, it was sacred ground. Every piece hanging on those walls was a confession, a resurrection. She had named the collection Unseen Women. Each canvas carried a story. The mother who never asked for help, the young girl who grew up too fast, the wife who smiled while dying inside, the woman who walked away and learned to breathe again, and among them, her own story, painted not in self-pity, but in truth, in color that refused to fade. By late afternoon, the space filled with people, strangers, artists, neighbors, faces she'd never seen and faces she'd once loved. The hum of conversation wove through the room like soft music, admiration, whispers, quiet awe. She walked slowly through it all, wearing a simple cream dress, her hair pulled back, no mask, no pretense. For the first time, she didn't feel like she was performing. Near the far wall, she saw Evelyn, small and steady as always, wearing her diner uniform beneath a borrowed shawl. The older woman's eyes glistened, and she smiled the way only people do when they've witnessed your breaking and your becoming. "You did it, kid," Evelyn murmured when Claire reached her. "You found your way back." Claire laughed softly, blinking back tears. "I thought I was painting my pain. Turns out I was painting my way home." Evelyn squeezed her hand. "That's what art does. It doesn't just tell the truth. It sets it free." Toward the center of the gallery hung the final piece, a self-portrait. Not of the broken woman she once was, nor the perfect one she pretended to be, but of the woman standing here now, imperfect, alive, whole. The brushstrokes were raw and untamed, strands of hair caught in motion, a faint smile shadowed by years of both loss and light. Mark stood before it, his expression unreadable. Beside him were Lila and Jake, their faces filled with something Claire couldn't quite name. Pride, maybe, or realization. When Mark turned to her, their eyes met across the room. No anger, no apologies left unsaid. Just an understanding born from distance and time. He stepped closer, stopping at a respectful space between them. "You really did find yourself," he said quietly. She nodded, calm and steady. "I did, and I hope you find you too." He smiled faintly, almost sadly. "I'm trying." And for the first time she believed him. Not because she wanted to, but because she no longer needed anything from him. Forgiveness had done its work. It had severed the chain without bitterness. As the evening stretched on, her children came to her one by one. Jake, taller now, his voice deeper, hugged her without words. Lila clung to her longer, whispering into her shoulder, "Mom, I'm proud of you." The world stilled for a second. Those words, simple, unadorned, mended something inside her she didn't realize was still fractured. "I'm proud of you too," Claire whispered back, "for seeing me, for letting me be me." They stood like that for a long time, the crowd a blur of sound and color around them. When the night wound down and the lights dimmed, she stepped outside into the cool air. The city hummed softly. Traffic in the distance, laughter spilling from a nearby cafe. Evelyn joined her, carrying 2 cups of black coffee. They sat on the gallery steps like they used to sit in the diner booth, side by side in quiet companionship. "What's next?" Evelyn asked after a while. Claire smiled, watching the stars blink above the rooftops. "I don't know, but I'm not afraid of not knowing anymore." The older woman chuckled. "That's how you know you've healed. You stop needing the map." Claire sipped her coffee, her reflection rippling in the dark window across the street. "I spent years being everything to everyone," she said softly. "Now, I just want to be." Before dawn, she drove back to her lake cottage. The air was cool and still, mist curling above the water like a slow exhale. She walked barefoot to the dock, the wood damp beneath her feet, the horizon just beginning to blush with light. For a moment, she simply stood there, breathing, listening, existing. The wind moved gently through her hair, carrying echoes of laughter, tears, and everything in between. She thought of Evelyn, of her children, of Mark, of her father, watching from somewhere beyond this world, proud of the daughter who had finally broken the silence. And then she thought of herself, not the version she used to be or the one she was supposed to be, but her, as she was now, free, whole, alive. She closed her eyes and whispered into the rising light, "I loved everyone, but this time I didn't forget me." The words floated out across the lake, carried by the dawn, merging with the song of waking birds and the slow stir of the world coming alive again. In that moment, she wasn't anyone's wife, or mother, or savior. She was simply Claire Matthews, a woman who remembered herself at last. And the world, in all its imperfect beauty, felt wide open. If you're still here, if you've walked with Claire through every heartbreak, every quiet cry behind closed doors, every moment she almost gave up, this part is for you. Because maybe you saw yourself in her. Maybe you've spent your life being the strong one, the one who holds everyone else together, even when you're falling apart. Maybe you've smiled through exhaustion, told everyone you're fine when you weren't, because somewhere along the way you learned that being loved meant being needed. You've poured yourself out until there was nothing left, and still, you kept giving. But tonight, as you sit here listening to her story, I want you to ask yourself the question Claire finally asked in the quiet. When was the last time you checked on you? When was the last time you let yourself stop holding it all together, stop pretending, stop apologizing for wanting more? Because somewhere beneath the noise, beneath the jobs, the chores, the obligations, the endless race to be enough, there's a small, steady voice that's been waiting. It's your own. The one that remembers what peace feels like. The one that remembers what you dreamed of before the world told you to be smaller, quieter, easier to love. The one that whispers, "I'm still here." That voice doesn't need anyone's permission. It doesn't need validation or approval. It just needs you to listen. You don't have to walk away from everything like Claire did. But maybe you walk toward yourself for the first time. Maybe you start by saying no without guilt, by resting without earning it, by forgiving yourself for not being unbreakable, by remembering that softness is not weakness, it's survival. And maybe Just maybe, you look in the mirror one morning and realize you're not lost anymore. You're returning. If you take one thing from this story, let it be this. You are not selfish for choosing yourself. You are not unloving for wanting peace. You are not broken for needing rest. You are human, and that is enough. So tonight, before you close your eyes, whisper the words Claire finally learned to say. I loved everyone, but this time, I won't forget me. And when the tears come, let them, because they're not weakness. They're proof you're still here, still feeling, still alive, still becoming. To every woman who's ever given too much, to every soul who's ever lost their light trying to keep others warm, this is your reminder. You were never meant to disappear in someone else's story. You were meant to rise in your own. Maybe that story wasn't fiction at all. Maybe it was your own reflection, told in someone else's voice, because stories like these don't end when they're over. They echo in every heart brave enough to feel them. Don't run from the ache. Feel it. That's how you know you're still alive. I'm Jenny, and this was another Heartbeat. Until we meet again, and don't forget to subscribe for more heart stories, because somewhere another story is already calling your name.